more information.
8 minutes to 9. Good morning. You're listening to the Business Breakfast.
Currencies on Dubai Eye 103.8.
With insurancemarket.ae.
Talking all things Saudi Arabia in a few moments' time and the economic growth there. A lot of that prompted by the Rial. Meanwhile, the dollar is, of course, the big talking point at the moment. Strength of the dollar around the world is what's writing headlines. Let's have a look and see how it's doing against popular remittances here. Told you about the rupees a little earlier on, about the Philippine peso, currently at 56.86 peso to the dollar, and the Egyptian pound again has lengthened a little at 19.32 Egyptian pound to $1.
Take care of your family with health and life insurance. Have peace of mind and full assurance. Insurancemarket.ae. Best deal guarantee. Largest in the UAE. For you, your family and your employees. Call 800-ALFRED. Insurancemarket.ae.
You're listening to the UAE's #1 talk radio station.
This is the Business Breakfast on Dubai Eye on 1.
And a bit of a reminder, if you missed us yesterday speaking to the guys at Espace Real Estate about the property regulations changing here in the UAE in terms of how many brokers can sell or rent one property. It is up on our podcast, and you can find that on the Dubai Eye website, dubai1038.com. Well, as Tom said, we are talking Saudi now. One of our headlines this morning, the Saudi Arabian economy growing by more than expected, just over 12%, 12.2% in Q2. Very pleased to be joined in the studio by the Standard Chartered Regional Economist, Carla Slim. Thanks so much for coming in, Carla.
Good morning, Brandy.
So 12.2%. How much of that is a high oil price and high energy output story?
Thank you, Brandy, for that question. First of all, on behalf of Standard Chartered, we extend our sincere condolences on the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. The impact of this historic news will be felt across the globe. To answer your question on Saudi, I think it's really important to differentiate between the impact of higher oil prices and higher oil production on real GDP growth, because over here we're talking about volumes rather than prices. You mentioned the 12.2% revised estimate. Yes, the second quarter GDP was revised higher. Initially, the estimates that were released by the authorities were 11.8%, and this was revised higher to 12.2%. Our forecast for 2022 is actually growth of 9.1%, which is higher than the consensus of 7.6%, which actually matches the IMF's forecast of 7.6% for 2022.
Okay, so if we just look at Q2, though, I mean, at the moment we're under $90 a barrel, but the last quarter has seen, triple figures for oil prices. And you mentioned there production as well, output. When we look at the growth of the Saudi Arabian economy as a whole, how much of it is just that energy boost?
More than 20%. So growth in the oil sector was more than 20%. But the non-oil sector was also growing in high single digits. So if we unpack this forecast, this headline number, that's what we actually find in terms of the breakdown between the oil sector growth and the non-oil sector growth. And you mentioned that this is specifically for Q2. So perhaps looking ahead, the question would be, do we expect this to be sustained, right?
It's literally a question I've got written down. Oil prices below $90 at the barrel. OPEC obviously is shoring up. But is this sustainable?
Yes. So implied in our 9% forecast is a slowdown in economic activity and headline economic activity, because the first half of the year averaged 11%. So if we take the Q2 12% that we're discussing and the Q1 11%, the average there was in double digits. So to achieve our 9% growth, this would imply a high single digit growth number for the second half of the year. So we are expecting a little bit of a slowdown, but this will be driven more so from the oil sector output slowdown rather than the non-oil sector, because when we look at high frequency indicators, everything points to the fact that domestic demand is alive and well in Saudi Arabia, even during the summer months, which is quite unseasonable typically. So we do expect non-oil sector growth to hold up, but perhaps some slowdown on the oil sector growth front, because Saudi in any case is nearing full capacity.
What do you put that summer growth down to? I mean, you say it's an anomaly.
So basically, some COVID restrictions in that perhaps residents were not traveling still the same way that they perhaps used to. And also the fact that in Saudi, purchasing power is high. There's been savings through the COVID period. So consumption is back basically on the ground. This is evidenced by PMI data, by the point of sales transactions that we tracked, which is published by SAMA, by even bank lending. When we look at private sector credit growth across sectors, whether it's personal loans, mortgages, construction, real estate, across sectors, we are seeing growth from the private sector credit growth bank lending.
What about inflation? Saudi's got a fairly low inflation reading, and yet it's also got the highest VAT in the region.
Yes, so VAT was tripled during COVID, and typically VAT has a one-off effect that only lasts 12 months. So the impact of the VAT from a statistical point of view is no longer seen in the data at the moment. You mentioned it has the lowest inflation from a CPI perspective. It's below 3%. This is against global inflation, which is obviously much higher, but also regional inflation. Dubai has 7% inflation. It's the fastest in the region, in the GCC. Qatar has the second highest inflation reading. Saudi is actually amongst the lowest. But it's important to note as well that wholesale prices, producer prices, are increasing in Saudi. They're in high single digits. They're just not being transmitted to the consumer in the same way that it is in other countries.
So you're saying what, companies are absorbing that?
Companies are absorbing it, and the government still has in place some price caps on energy, on food, that is protecting the consumer basically, and protecting this, letting Saudi avoid demand destruction, the same way we're seeing in other markets.
We've got 1 minute left with you. You mentioned the forecasts for growth this year. What kind of growth does Saudi need to see with its large population, with its plans for the economy to keep doing what it wants to do?
So in our view, any growth number for Saudi or even for the GCC that is higher than 4%, 4.5%, is healthy with regards to reversing the unemployment deterioration, the deterioration in unemployment rates that we saw during COVID. And this is already something we're seeing in Saudi. Unemployment has improved to 6% overall. So 4.5% is the healthy number that we should see in the GCC.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Standard Chartered Regional Economist Carla Slim, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Talking to us about those revised Saudi Q2 numbers that are in our headlines this morning. Economic growth being revised upwards to just over 12%. That is a decade high.
Take Dubai Eye 103.8 with you anywhere.
Find us on the free ARN